Hey, what's up guys? I thought it'd be cool to talk about the different lenses I have that I use for both stills and video, and a couple of these you might have not seen before or heard me talk about, but I have used all these in videos at some point. So why don't we first start off with the Canon 70 to 300 millimeter. This is an f4 to f5.6 lens. I don't really use this as much for videos anymore, but I used to on certain shots for product reviews. I mostly use this for stills if I need to get a long focal length. This goes from 70 all the way to 300, and this is a Canon EF mount. So I use this a lot with my 5D Mark III. It's got that full frame, so it's nice to have that big zoom, and this is a pretty hefty lens. It's an L lens, which is Canon's premium line, and overall this is just a fun lens to use, although it is pretty heavy, and it's the only gray lens I have, so it probably is the coolest looking one. But we can move on. Next is my Canon 24 to 105, and this is the kit lens that came with my Canon 5D Mark III. I say it's a kit lens, but it's also an L lens, so it's actually a really good kit lens. And this goes from 24 to 105, so pretty darn wide angle, to 105, so it's a moderate telephoto, I guess you could say. And it also has stabilization, as well as the other one I mentioned has stabilization. Also an EF mount. Don't really use this as much anymore for video because I shoot with the Sony, but we can talk about that other lens in a bit. So this one you probably saw me use when I was shooting on my 5D Mark III, but I also like to use this especially for wide angle shots, like in landscape shots, that kind of thing that I might post on my Instagram. This is a great one. It's one of the wider lenses that I have. So, and it also has that pretty good zoom, so it's a good balance, and it's not as huge as the other one. So this is a good balance of a lens. It doesn't have the most amazing image quality when you have it super wide angle trying to do shots, especially on the edges, but it's pretty good, and it is still an L lens. I like to use this lens when I'm not really sure which lens I need to use. It's always a safe bet. Next, we can talk about these two lenses actually. These are pretty similar, so may as well tie them together. So here we have my 50mm prime and my 85mm prime. These do not zoom, but the advantage of a prime lens is typically you get a much wider aperture. So in the case of the 50mm, you have all the way down to 1.4, so you can get really a lot of light in there and get shallow depth of field. And the 85mm, a little bit longer focal length, goes to 1.8, so not as wide as this, but still pretty wide open. And I like to use this sometimes if I need to get like a really shallow depth of field, and I'll use this in videos. A lot of my older videos, I like to use this one especially. So these are fun lenses if you need to get really good image quality. Prime lenses are typically better image quality than a zoom, and these are actually really affordable as well, at least compared to some of the L lenses. Really good budget lenses. There is an L lens version of both, but they cost about maybe 3 times the price. So I figured, you know what, I'll take the slightly lower aperture size, and these are great as well. Next, we can talk about this. This is my Sony 18 to 105 lens. This actually came with my Sony FS5, which I'm recording with now. It's an okay lens. It's only f4, so if I need any extra light at all, it's not like a studio setting, probably wouldn't go with this lens. Although, you know, it's a good balance if you need to really be able to have a wide range of focal length. It's got 18mm, really wide, to 105, and with the crop factor, it's still pretty good. It's got some image stabilization built in, which is also nice. One thing I'm really not a fan of with these Sony lenses is these rotator rings don't mechanically control the lens. You can see when I turn it, nothing happens inside the lens. It's all software controlled in the camera, whereas say I use this Canon lens, you can kind of see, maybe not so much that one, but if I zoom for sure, you see it go up and down. And in there, the aperture, you might be able to see it increase and decrease. It's actually doing something inside the lens, whereas with this one, the camera has to receive the signal that, oh, you want to rotate it because you did this, which means there's kind of a delay. It's not really instant. You know, I kind of live with it because I mostly use it for video anyway, but I do like the mechanical feel of the Canon lenses. So overall, this is a pretty decent kit lens. Doesn't really excite me or anything. It works, but that's about it. Now we can get to some cool stuff. This is a Rokinon 14mm Cine lens. Look at the curve on that glass. That is sticking out. So this is a really neat piece of glass here. This is obviously very wide angle, so it's not very useful in too many situations, but when I do get to use it, it is really awesome for certain shots. And also, as I mentioned, this is a Cine lens, which has a couple differences. First of all, it's not autofocus at all. It's completely manual. And then because it's a Cine lens, the f-stops are actually t-stops. And the difference between that is, instead of being an actual calculation with how much light is getting through with an f-stop, with a t-stop, it's based on how much light is measured to go through. I'm not really gonna get into it, but basically they're pretty much the same thing. This goes from T3.1 to T22, and it's a totally smooth change. And this is also a prime lens, so it doesn't zoom, but it's very specific in for that super wide angle, 14mm. This is the widest angle lens I have, and it goes from T3.1 to T22. So moderately good at low light, not the greatest, but 3.1 is pretty awesome still. Finally, this is probably the most unique lens I have. This is the MPE 65mm Canon lens, and this is not like any other lens I have, or really any other lens on the market, and this is actually a macro lens. And I want to show you, when I twist it out, how much it telescopes. I have to move it back because it's going out of the frame. And the interesting thing about this lens is it goes from 1 to 5x. You can see these marks here, and I want to try and explain what that means. So 1x in a macro lens terminology means that when you're pointing this at an object and it's in focus, then it is going to appear on the sensor as the exact same size as it is in real life. So if it's on a full frame sensor and it is the same size as that sensor, then it's going to fill up the entire frame, if that makes sense. Whereas at 5x, if it's 1/5 the size of the sensor, the physical sensor, it's going to fill up the entire frame because it's multiplied by 5x. 5x is basically a microscope. I've used this in a couple videos for phone reviews to get incredibly close to certain parts of the phone, and it's really a unique look. And what's difficult about this lens, it's not only not autofocus, but there is no focus ring at all on this lens at all. You have to use what are called macro rails, which I don't have with me, but you use these macro rails to move the lens physically closer and further away to focus. So you focus by moving the lens closer and further away from the subject. And the zoom obviously is this whole lens. It does have different apertures. I believe it's 1.2.8. So it's actually a relatively wide aperture, and you can control that through the camera. But the zoom you have to do physically, as well as the focus is as manual as it gets. And believe me, when you're zooming in at 5x, where the depth of field might only be 0.5 millimeter, it gets really difficult. And also the way magnification works in general, as you zoom in closer with this, you need more and more light. So you have to really have lights right next to it, or else it's going to be completely dark, even wide open. When it's looking at something, you better have a ton of light on it, or else you're not going to be able to see it at all at the maximum zoom level. So that's it. Those are all my lenses, except for the one on my camera, of course, which is a wide angle Sony Prime on my FS5, but again, that's not as interesting. These are mostly the ones I wanted to talk about, so hopefully you guys thought it was interesting. If you have any questions about some in particular, then I'll try to answer them down in the comment section. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up so I know you liked it. Also, let me know if you want me to do more of these, talking about gear, and maybe I'll make more in the future. If you guys want to subscribe, I make new videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at least, so it should be worth it. And if you want to check out some other videos, those will be on the right-hand side. You can just click them or look in the description for the same link like if you're on a phone. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys either here on YouTube or on Twitter. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.